It was a still, somber evening when I first noticed her, the elusive figure who raced through my tranquil lawn like a shadow cutting through moonlight. The neighborhood murmured about her, dubbing her the infamous HOA Karen, a moniker laced with equal parts disdain and fear. Her presence was a storm brewing on our serene cul-de-sac, disrupting the peace with each reckless charge. One evening, as dusk draped its purple hues over the neighborhood, I stood at my window, silently watching the grass sway in the evening breeze. That's when I saw her again, Karen, her car tearing through the boundary between my home and hers, leaving behind a trail of crushed petals and flattened earth. A gaze shared through glass conveyed more than words could muster. My silent plea for understanding clashed with her relentless disregard. In the quiet hours that followed, I retreated to my garden, seeking solace among the blooms I had nurtured with tender care. Among them, a small garden gnome stood sentinel, its weathered face a witness to the passing seasons. It had been a gift from my late grandmother, a woman who understood the language of flowers and the unspoken bonds between earth and heart. The gnome's presence, once a whimsical addition to my garden, now bore a weight of symbolism. It marked not just a memory of simpler times, but a defiance against the encroaching turmoil. Its weathered visage mirrored my own silent resolve, a testament to the resilience found in quiet rebellion against chaos. Days turned to weeks, and the tension between Karen and our community simmered beneath the surface like water ready to boil. Each evening, as the sky painted itself in shades of rose and gold, I found myself drawn to the garden. There, in the fading light, I would stand, a silent sentinel amidst the blossoms, contemplating the delicate balance between patience and action. Moments etched in memory like scenes from a film, Karen's car slicing through the twilight, the gnome standing steadfast amid a sea of petals. Each frame held a story untold, a narrative woven with threads of defiance and determination. In those fleeting moments, the garden became not just a sanctuary, but a stage where the dance of life and conflict played out in whispered sighs and silent vows. And so, as the days stretched into a quiet crescendo of anticipation, I knew that beneath the surface of our suburban tranquility, a story was unfolding, a story of resilience tested, of boundaries redrawn, and of the quiet courage found in standing firm against the storm. The garden gnome, weathered but unwavering, stood as a poignant reminder of the strength found in stillness, the power of roots that run deep beneath the surface. In its steadfast gaze, I saw not just a symbol of defiance, but a promise of renewal, a promise that even in the face of adversity, there blooms a garden of possibility, waiting to be nurtured and cherished anew. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden, I knew that our story was far from over. The echoes of Karen's recklessness lingered in the air, a reminder of the battles yet to be fought and the victories yet to be won. But amid the uncertainty, one thing remained clear: the garden, with its quiet resilience and steadfast resolve, would stand as a testament to the power of perseverance, a testament to the strength found in planting roots and letting them grow deep. The night after her tires last tore through my grass, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of my fan and the distant sound of a train somewhere far beyond our neighborhood. I could still see the tracks she left behind, deep grooves across the lawn I had reseeded that spring. It wasn't just the ruined yard. It was something more than that, something that settled deep in my chest and refused to leave. When morning finally came, I stepped outside barefoot, the dew soaking through my socks. The gnome was still standing there by the garden bed, slightly tilted now from where the ground had shifted under Karen's tire. I knelt beside it and brushed off the dirt clinging to its side. There was a small chip in the corner of its cap. It hadn't been there before. Something about that tiny imperfection hit me harder than it should have. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it, remembering the day my grandmother gave it to me. I must have been 11, maybe 12. She had called me over after school, her hands still stained with soil from her own garden, and handed it to me wrapped in a towel like it was something sacred. She said it was a protector, that it watched over things that couldn't speak for themselves. Even the ground has a soul, she told me, and it remembers who cares and who doesn't. I didn't understand that then. Not really. But now I felt it. That the earth did remember. It remembered the soft touch of my hands sowing seeds in spring, the countless hours I spent pulling weeds, arranging stones just so. And now, it remembered the cruelty too, the careless crushing of something tender, something meant to be safe. Karen wasn't always like this. At least, not that I knew. When she first moved into the neighborhood a couple of years ago, she came across as just firm. Not rude, exactly. But she had this sharpness about her, like she was always waiting to correct someone. Over time, The sharpness grew teeth. She got herself on the HOA board within months and started barking about the rules like she wrote the book on them. But what made her start driving across my lawn? That was something I still didn't understand. Some of the neighbors said it was just a shortcut, some selfish convenience. Others whispered it was personal, that maybe she just didn't like the way I kept my hedges or the color of my shutters. But I always suspected it was about something else, something unspoken. The first time she did it, I thought it was an accident. She reversed out of her driveway a little too fast, and her rear tire clipped the edge of my lawn. It was close to the corner, not a big deal. I waved it off. But then it happened again. And again. Each time, a little deeper, a little bolder. Until eventually, she wasn't backing into it. She was cutting right across, like it didn't even exist. I left a note once. Just a quiet, polite message. Please don't drive through my yard. I even signed it with a smiley face, trying to keep it light. The next day, I found the note crumpled in my mailbox with a single word scrawled across it. Move. All caps. There was something humiliating about it. Not just the word, but the message behind it. That my space, my care, my effort didn't matter. That I didn't matter. It reminded me of another time I'd felt that way. A different house, different place. When my father used to come home late from the bar and slam the screen door so hard it rattled every window. My mom used to sit real still at the table, her hand wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. She never said a word, just stared at the chipped handle like she was somewhere else. That's what I thought about when I saw Karen drive through again. That quiet hurt. That feeling of being invisible in your own space. The lawn was never just a lawn. It was the only thing I had full control over. Every blade of grass, every flower I planted, every stone placed by hand, it was a way of reminding myself that I could still build something good, that I could grow things, even when life felt like it was stuck in winter. And she was tearing it down, bit by bit, pass after pass, like it was nothing, like I was nothing. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself crouched at the window, lights off, just watching. There was something strangely addictive about the anticipation, like waiting for a thunderstorm. Would she come? Would she pass through again? I hated the feeling, the tightness in my chest, the way my hands curled into fists. But I couldn't stop. There was one night when it rained harder than it had in months. The kind of rain that floods gutters and makes the whole world smell like soaked concrete and wet bark. I stood at the window, watching it come down in sheets. And then, like clockwork, headlights. Her SUV turned slowly from the corner, paused at the edge of the street, then lurched forward, straight through the lawn again. The sound of tires tearing through mud, that sickening squelch, it made me flinch. And then, the lights just kept going, as if nothing had happened. That night, I walked out barefoot again. The ground was cold and soft beneath me, slick with rain. I looked at the destruction, the fresh gash torn across the grass. I looked at the gnome, now half sunken, its chipped hat glistening with raindrops. And something in me cracked, not loud, not dramatic. Just a small, internal shift, like a match struck in a dark room. I didn't say anything to her. Not the next day, not the one after. But I started researching. Late at night, scrolling forums, watching videos, reading stories. People had done all kinds of things. Cameras, signs, fences. But none of that felt right. None of it would fix what she had broken inside me. I started walking more. Around the block, through the neighborhood. And I noticed how everyone else lived in this quiet tension. People mowing at the same time every week, bringing their trash bins back exactly on schedule, painting their doors only in approved colors. There was this invisible thread binding us all, rules that nobody wanted but everyone obeyed. Except her. She didn't follow rules. She enforced them, and she never thought they applied to her. There was one evening, weeks after the last rain, where I stopped beside a small crack in the sidewalk by my driveway. It looked like nothing, just a narrow split. But within it, a single weed had grown tall, defiant, reaching toward the sun. I don't know why it made me pause, but I thought of how much effort we spend hiding the cracks, pulling the weeds, pretending everything's pristine. And how maybe there's something sacred in the wild things that grow anyway. That's when the idea started to form. Not out of vengeance exactly, but something more raw, more wounded. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just wanted her to feel what it was like to tread carelessly and be reminded that the ground pushes back. I spent the next few days quieter than usual. My neighbors probably thought I was getting sick or depressed. I didn't wave as much. I didn't trim the hedges. but inside, I was more alive than I'd felt in months. There was something about having a secret, something about crafting a quiet stand, that reignited a part of me I thought was long gone. The gnome, of course, stayed exactly where it always had, watching. I began to think of it not just as a memory of my grandmother, but as something more. A witness. A companion. A silent reminder of everything I'd endured and everything I was slowly, stubbornly reclaiming. And yet, under all of that, there was still fear. Not of Karen, exactly, but of what I was becoming in response to her. There's a quiet kind of violence in planting spikes under your own grass. Even if no one sees it, even if it never gets used. You know it's there. You know what it means. That you reached a place where gentleness no longer felt safe. I would sometimes catch myself staring into the mirror longer than I should, trying to find traces of the person I used to be. The one who offered notes with smiley faces. The one who believed people would do the right thing if you just asked kindly enough. I don't know when exactly he disappeared. I just know the silence left behind feels colder than I expected. What does it do to a person to be ignored long enough? To be walked over, dismissed, crushed under someone else's convenience? I think a lot of us carry that same question. I see it in the tired smiles of neighbors who never speak up, in the overwatered flower beds, the endlessly polished mailboxes, the strict adherence to guidelines that feel more like shackles. It's not about grass or fences or gnomes. It's about trying to feel like you still matter in a world that often acts like you don't. So when I touched the gnome that last night, before the next rain, and whispered a quiet apology to it, I wasn't just talking to a piece of ceramic. I was talking to everything in me that still wanted to believe in peace, in kindness, in second chances. But peace doesn't grow where it's not watered. And I was done waiting for the rain. The next morning arrived with an eerie stillness. Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that presses on your chest and makes you feel like something is about to go wrong. The sky was blanketed with clouds the color of old bruises, and the air felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. I sat at my kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee I wasn't drinking. Across from me, the gnome was barely visible through the window, standing guard as always. I hadn't moved it. I couldn't. Every time I thought about it, about the way its chipped hat had come to feel like a scar I carried too, I just froze. There was an edge in the way I existed now, like I'd started walking around with splinters in my skin. And Karen wasn't the only source of it anymore. Something deeper had begun to stir, a feeling I didn't know what to do with. Was it anger? Sadness? Exhaustion? Sometimes the lines blurred. Later that day, I stepped outside to find another tire track, fresh and bold, deeper than ever. It veered dangerously close to the row of sunflowers I had planted with my niece just a few weeks ago. Her tiny hands had helped scoop the dirt. She'd drawn smiley faces on the wooden markers we used to label them. And now, one more inch, and those would have been crushed, too. That was the breaking point. But instead of exploding, I did something else. I knocked on Karen's door. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the chime. For a moment, I almost hoped she wouldn't answer. But of course, she did. She opened the door halfway, arms crossed tight, the usual frown painted across her lips. Behind her, I noticed how dim her living room looked. Stacks of unopened mail sat on a narrow table. A curtain hung crooked on one side. And on the wall, a single framed photo, too far to make out clearly, was hanging just slightly off-center. "What?" she said flatly. "I want to talk." "About what?" I swallowed hard. "The lawn." She rolled her eyes. "Are we really doing this?" "Yes," I said. "We are." "I know you've been driving across it on purpose," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "And it matters to me." "And it doesn't matter to me," she said simply. Her voice wasn't cruel. It was hollow, tired, like she'd run out of fuel a long time ago and was just coasting on whatever anger was left. I stared at her, trying to understand. "Why? What did I do?" She laughed once, but it was bitter, empty. "You exist." "What?" She looked up at me for the first time. "You take care of that stupid lawn like it's the most important thing in the world. You wave at people like everything's fine. You plant flowers with kids. You probably still write thank you cards and water your neighbor's plants when they're gone. And I can't stand it." There was no yelling, just the rawness of her honesty cutting through the room like broken glass. "Why?" I asked again, my voice quieter. She looked away, toward the window. "Because it reminds me of everything I used to be. Before my husband died. Before my son stopped talking to me. Before the HOA was the only thing that still listened." Her words sank like stones in my chest. She rubbed her face and exhaled sharply. I wasn't always this bitter. But watching you, day after day, caring for things like they still matter, it felt like you were mocking me. Like the world was mocking me. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything. The silence between us now wasn't awkward. It was necessary. In that moment, I saw it clearly. That invisible mirror. The one we never want to look into. Karen, beneath all her rage, wasn't that different from me. She was lonely, wounded, trying to control whatever pieces of her world were still within reach. And I was doing the same thing, just in a different way. I'm sorry for what you've been through, I said eventually. She didn't respond, just looked down at her hands. They were trembling. I'm still going to fix the lawn, I added. But maybe next time, you could just talk to me. She nodded once, barely perceptible. As I stepped back out into the gray afternoon, a gust of wind scattered some fallen petals from the sunflowers across the cracked sidewalk. The air felt heavier now, but somehow I didn't feel as alone in it. That evening, I walked to the back of my house, pulled out the spikes I'd hidden in the soil. I couldn't leave them there anymore, not after that. They weren't just dangerous. They were a symbol of who I was becoming. And I didn't like that person. I wanted to believe there was still another way. Over the next few days, things changed, just not all at once. Karen didn't drive across the lawn again. But she also didn't wave. I didn't expect her to. Sometimes damage isn't healed in a moment. Sometimes it just stops spreading. One morning, a few weeks later, I saw her standing by the edge of her driveway. She looked uncertain, like someone on the edge of a decision. Then she bent down slowly and picked up a fallen branch from the street, one that had blown off during the storm the night before, and carried it to the bin. That was all. But for some reason, it meant something. A small act. A quiet gesture. Life went on, but I found myself paying more attention. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way Mrs. Dalka from down the street always rearranged the gnomes in her yard when she was nervous. How Mr. Tran's lights flickered at the exact same time every evening, and he always came out with a tiny flashlight to check the box. How the widowed man 2 houses over sat on his porch every night at 6:30 sharp, sipping tea from a chipped mug and staring at nothing. Everyone was carrying something. Everyone had their own invisible lawn, something fragile, something they tended to, something they didn't want others stepping on. And maybe that's the real conflict we're all stuck in, not between neighbors or property lines, but between our inner pain and our outer world, between what we show and what we suppress, between what we protect and what we destroy just to feel something again. One night, it rained again. The good kind, the kind that smells like renewal. I stepped outside with no umbrella, just stood there letting the water soak through my clothes. The gnome stood quietly beside me, rain rolling down its face like tiny tears. I remembered my grandmother again. How she used to say storms were nature's way of starting over. The ground needs the pain, she once told me. It's how it learns to bloom again. I looked across the street at Karen's house. One window glowed dimly. I imagined her inside, maybe watching the same rain, maybe thinking the same thing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the grip inside me loosen. The pain wasn't gone. But maybe that was okay. Maybe we weren't meant to get rid of it. Maybe we were just meant to carry it better and try not to let it spill onto someone else's lawn. It started with silence again. Not the still kind this time, but the kind that creaks at the edges like a rope pulled too tight. The kind of silence that builds between two people who both want to say something, but don't know how to start. A silence that feels like it's waiting, watching for something to snap. It had been weeks since that rain-soaked night. Karen hadn't crossed the lawn since. The gnome still stood in place, though now the grass around it had grown in uneven patches, wild and untamed in parts, too trimmed in others. It looked like a patchwork of past and present, one foot in war, the other in healing. Then one evening, everything shifted again. It was just after 7. The sky had that faded blue glow that only lasts a few minutes before night sinks in. I was taking the trash out when I noticed Karen's car wasn't in the driveway. Her porch light was on, doors slightly ajar. Something about it felt off enough to draw me closer. At first, I told myself I was just being neighborly. But as I got closer, I noticed her mailbox overflowing, the front porch cluttered with flyers and unopened packages. The HOA newsletters, 2 of them still rubber-banded together. A dead plant by the door, leaves withered and gray. Something was wrong. I knocked gently. Karen. No answer. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. What I saw stopped me cold. The living room looked the same, frozen in time, untouched since the last visit. But on the floor, by the far wall, was a crumpled figure. Her, curled in on herself, a phone dropped nearby, an open bottle of pills just inches away. I rushed to her side. She was breathing, shallow, ragged, but alive. Her face was wet with tears, and her fingers clutched something tightly in her palm. It was a photo, the same one from the wall. A boy, maybe 7 or 8. Big eyes, bright smile. His hand held by a man, her husband, I guessed. And Karen, standing beside them. Before everything cracked, I called for help. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I kept talking to her, saying anything, everything, until the sirens arrived and strangers in uniforms took her away. I stood in the yard, the grass damp beneath my feet, the gnome's shadow stretching long and strange across the earth. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch and stared at her house, the flashing lights long gone, but the feeling still throbbing in my chest like a second heartbeat. How many signs had I missed? How many people were breaking in quiet places? And how often do we turn those people into villains just because they're carrying their pain wrong? The next morning was heavy with fog, thick enough that the street vanished into a ghostly blur. It made everything feel like a dream you hadn't fully woken from. I walked to the edge of my lawn, then crossed the invisible line that separated our worlds. I picked up her scattered mail, watered the dead plant, put the spilled packages in a safe, dry spot under her awning. And for the first time, I noticed something carved into the side of her porch beam, faint, barely there. A name. Eli. I don't know why, but I touched it, tracing the groove with my fingertips. It felt like touching something sacred, like brushing a scar someone was brave enough to leave uncovered. That day, I didn't see her, nor the next, but I began walking past her house every morning, slowing near the mailbox, waiting for a sign. Something. It came in the form of a letter, slid under my door, folded 3 times. All it said was, "I don't know why I let myself disappear. Thank you for seeing me anyway." No name, but I didn't need one. There was so much weight in those few words, it made my chest ache. I started writing her back, short notes. Slipped through her door quietly. About little things, the weather, a funny memory, the day I'd planted the sunflowers. Sometimes I just wrote what I was feeling, without needing her to fix it. Somehow, that made it easier. In one letter, I wrote, "You know, I used to hate silence. It made me feel like no one was listening. But now I'm learning it's not the silence that hurts. It's when no one speaks into it." Weeks passed. A rhythm returned. The lawn slowly recovered, the grass filling in where the ruts had once scarred it. But I left one small patch bare, just beneath the gnome. A reminder. A place where truth had been buried and unearthed again. The HOA kept sending their newsletters. I tossed them in the recycling without opening. One afternoon, a new neighbor parked halfway over the curb. Not on the lawn, just close. The old me would have flared up, maybe even walked over. But now, I waited. And sure enough, they came back out with a sheepish smile, adjusting the car without being asked. Sometimes, grace works louder than confrontation. But still, something deeper was building inside me. A pressure. A question I kept circling around, but couldn't ask out loud. Had I done enough? Had I forgiven enough? Had I truly changed, or just paused the cycle? That answer came the night of the storm. It started with thunder, distant and low, a growl in the belly of the sky. By midnight, rain slammed the windows like angry hands. Wind bent the trees, sent trash cans tumbling. Lightning cracked the sky in jagged, terrifying streaks. And then, through the roaring night, I heard it. A knock. 3 sharp taps. I opened the door, heart hammering. There she was. Karen, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes wild. "I need help," she said. Without a word, I pulled her inside. She was shaking, not from cold, but from something deeper. Something raw. "I went to visit Eli today," she said. "The first time in years. His school's on the other side of town. I stood outside the gate for an hour. He didn't see me. I didn't let him. I listened. I wanted to yell at him, tell him how much he hurt me. But then I remembered what you said about silence, and I realized I was the one who never spoke into his. I just filled it with rules and resentment." Her voice cracked. I came home and sat in that room and thought, what if I never try again? What if the storm is the last thing I ever hear? We sat in the living room, the thunder pounding above us like war drums, and she wept. Not the sharp kind. The slow kind. The kind that sounds like years falling off someone's soul. At some point, I wrapped a blanket around her. Lit the candle I'd kept on the mantel for emergencies. The soft flame made our shadows stretch and sway on the wall like ghosts dancing. She looked up at me. I used to plant roses, she whispered, before I got tired of watching them die. There it was again, that invisible mirror. I wanted to tell her something. Something true. So I said, some flowers don't bloom the first year. Some take 2 or 10. But the roots are still there. Still alive. Just waiting. Outside, the wind howled. But inside, we sat in that small, flickering light like 2 people finally brave enough to say, I'm not okay, but I'm still here. When the storm passed, the streets glistened under the moonlight like they'd been polished clean. Everything smelled like earth and new beginnings. Karen walked home barefoot, shoes in hand, splashing quietly through puddles. She turned back once and said, thank you for not planting more spikes. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Not yet. I just stood there in the doorway, the air thick with the scent of wet grass and second chances. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something move. Something old beginning to loosen. Something heavy beginning to lift. And I knew then, the final choice was coming. The one that would test if everything we'd been through had really changed us, or if we were just pretending to be whole on the surface. And the next time that line between peace and war was crossed, what I did next would matter more than anything I'd done before. 3 days passed before I saw her again. Karen's porch light was off, mailbox empty. The plant had bloomed a little, tiny yellow buds curling toward the late spring sun. I wanted to believe that meant something, that maybe her storm had passed, too. But I couldn't shake the feeling, that flicker behind the ribs that says, something's coming. I felt it most in the quiet. There was this one night, strangely still, the kind that seems to hold its breath. I was brushing my teeth when I saw it again. The gnome. Except it wasn't where I left it. It had been moved. Just slightly, maybe an inch or 2 turned toward the porch. But it was enough. Enough to feel wrong. I stepped out onto the lawn, barefoot. The grass was damp. The air had that metallic smell, like rain was on its way but hadn't decided yet. I walked up to the gnome and crouched beside it. There was something tucked under it. A folded piece of paper. Shaky handwriting scrawled across the top. Don't believe everything I said. It wasn't signed. But I didn't need a name. The words hit me like a stone to the chest. All this time, I thought we were healing. Now I wasn't sure what we were walking toward. I turned the note over. On the back, scribbled hastily, was a line I recognized instantly. The silence isn't what hurts. It's when no one speaks into it. My own words. Spoken weeks ago, now echoed back at me. But why? Why now? That night, I didn't sleep again. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the hallway clock. 1, 2, 3. A rhythm that felt almost cruel. Like it knew I was waiting for something to break. And it did. But not in the way I expected. Around 4 a.m., my phone buzzed. An unknown number. One line in the message. Check the hospital. She didn't go alone. My blood ran cold. I pulled on clothes and drove through the quietest streets I'd ever seen. Even the traffic lights felt like they were blinking slower. As if the city itself was in mourning. At the ER desk, I gave her name. The nurse didn't blink. She's an observation. She brought someone with her. A boy. Teenage. Seemed shaken up, but okay. A boy. Not a boy. Eli. I stood frozen. For a full minute, I couldn't breathe. When I was finally allowed in, I found them in a dim room. Karen sat in the corner, face blotchy, staring out the window like she was watching a movie no one else could see. Beside her, a lanky teen in a hoodie curled into the chair, earbuds in, but his eyes open, glassy and distant. She looked up. Said nothing. He looked at me. And for the first time, I saw the same eyes from the photo on her wall. The boy she lost. Or maybe the boy she left behind in pieces. He stood. You're the neighbor, right? His voice was raw, like he hadn't spoken in days. I'm Eli, he said, then shrugged. Or whatever version of me she's still hoping I'll turn back into. The sentence hung in the air, like smoke refusing to clear. Karen flinched. I told him the truth, she whispered. That I tried. That I hated myself. That I disappeared. Eli's jaw tightened. No, he said, his voice harder now. You told me your version. But I remember it differently. I remember the screaming. The slammed doors. The time you left me at school on my birthday. The time Dad had to sneak out of the house at 3 a.m. to take me to the ER because you were too busy crying over a cracked wine glass. Karen folded in on herself. Like the weight of his words knocked something loose inside her. I stood there, unable to move. I came with her because she said she wanted to fix things, Eli continued. But now she's saying maybe she shouldn't have. That maybe I'm safer without her. He looked at me again. I don't want to be her project. I just wanted her to ask what I remember. Then he was gone out the door before either of us could stop him. Karen stayed sitting, staring, and I realized this was it. The emotional no return. She wasn't trying to heal anymore. She was unraveling in reverse. Later that night, I found her back on her porch, a blanket around her shoulders. No shoes. I thought I could fix it, she said without looking at me. If I just showed up. But some things don't rewind, do they? I sat beside her. Didn't speak. He still has that scar, she whispered. From the bike accident. The one I told everyone didn't happen because I couldn't admit I left him alone. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. They just shimmered there, held in by some last thread of control. And that line you said, about silence. I kept repeating it to myself, over and over. But I realized I am the silence. I'm what he had to grow up screaming into. There it was. The betrayal wasn't between them. It was between the woman she wanted to be and the one she actually was. A day later, the lawn was trampled again. But not by Karen. It was a flyer. Dozens of them, scattered by the wind. HOA new policy enforcement. Lawn violation notices, immediate fines apparently. Someone had taken pictures. Old ones. Circulated them. Pushed a complaint through the board. A neighbor I barely knew. Curtis, 2 houses down, strolled by smirking. Rules are rules, he said. But it wasn't about the grass. It never had been. I snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But the way someone does when they decide they're done performing politeness for people who weaponize order. I walked over to his pristine yard and placed the gnome right in the middle. Didn't say a word. Curtis blinked. What the hell is this? I turned back to my porch. He watches over lawns, I said. And the people who forget those lawns belong to human beings. That night, someone stole the gnome. Gone. Just like that. No note. No trace. But something in me shifted again. That was the second betrayal. Not by a person, but by the community we built around pretending. Pretending our fences meant peace. That our trimmed hedges meant harmony. The lawn wars weren't about turf. They were about pain. Buried pain. Everyone just chose different ways to cover it. Some used flowers. Some used rules. Some, like Karen, used silence. I started hearing things through the neighborhood. Whispers. Some said Karen had a breakdown. Others said she made up the son. That the boy was a neighbor's kid she bribed for attention. And the worst part? I said nothing. Not because I believed them, but because I was tired. Because I'd let the gnome carry the burden of speaking up for too long. This symbolic protector. Now gone. Then, one morning, Karen was gone, too. Her porch empty. Curtains drawn. Mail paused. The plant dried out again. I found another note under a stone where the gnome used to be. I think I became the storm. I hope you don't hate me for it. The handwriting was smaller. Shakier. This time, I cried. Not loudly. The quiet kind. The kind that slips out in the middle of buttering toast. Or folding laundry. Or staring at a spot on the wall where a picture used to hang. I kept the note in my drawer. Next to the photo she gave me when I hadn't looked at in weeks. It wasn't the original from her wall. This one was different. Karen, alone. Sitting on a swing. Hair windblown. Smile small, almost forced. On the back, written faintly in pencil, taken by Eli. Right before he stopped calling me Mom. I held it for a long time. It felt heavier than paper should. The next day, I went out and bought another gnome. Not the same. A little taller. No shovel. Just holding a lantern. I placed it in the bare patch of grass. The roots were still there, after all. Even if the garden looked different now. And I waited. Waited for the next storm. Because there's always another. But this time, I wouldn't meet it with fences or fines. I'd meet it with light. It rained the next morning. Not the kind that eases in with warning or rhythm. This rain was sudden, wild, slamming against windows like it had been holding back for months. It soaked the world in seconds, drawing gray across every color, drowning sound in a steady roar. I stood at the window, watching it pour over the lawn, pooling around the new gnome's feet. The lantern it held glowed faintly in the gloom. Almost defiant. Almost alive. And then came the knock. A soft, hesitant tap that barely registered through the storm. I hesitated. Part of me expecting no one to be there. Or worse, someone from the HOA with another form, another threat pretending to be help. I opened the door, breath caught somewhere between dread and hope. It was Eli, soaked to the bone. Hoodie plastered to his frame, hair stuck across his forehead, eyes wide and red-rimmed, not from the rain. He didn't speak. He just held something out in trembling hands. The original gnome. Muddy, scratched, one side of its face chipped clean off. He looked down at it like it was a body. I found it in the creek behind the park, he said hoarsely. Someone tossed it. I don't know why I went looking. I just kept thinking about it standing there. Like it meant something. It did. Of course it did. I stepped aside. Let him in. He didn't say no. We sat in silence for a long time, the storm wrapping the house in a cocoon of static. Eli set the gnome gently on the table, then stared at it like he was waiting for it to speak. I went to her place, he said finally. The one she moved to. She wasn't there. Just a note. She left it for me. He handed me another piece of paper. Smeared ink. Folded unevenly. I opened it with a kind of reverence. I couldn't find forgiveness in myself. So I tried to borrow it from you. That wasn't fair. Maybe someday, the silence will grow something better. Maybe I'll be brave enough to return when I can hold it. Eli sniffed. I hated her, he said. I hated how she made everything about fixing what she broke. Like I was a test she needed to pass. But then I realized I do the same thing. I punish people for not showing up perfectly. He looked up at me, voice trembling. I've been doing that to everyone, even myself. I didn't know what to say. So I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. And then I told him something I hadn't said to anyone. When I was 8, I broke my mother's wedding plate. She screamed at me so loud I couldn't breathe. I lied about it. Said it was the dog. She never forgave the dog. I kept that secret for years. And every time I looked at her, I wondered if she'd love me less if she knew. Eli blinked, startled by the shift. That guilt, it grows, I continued. Even after the plate is gone. Even after she was gone. I've spent so much of my life trying to glue myself back together in secret. But it's the cracks that let the light in, right? He nodded, just barely. Then came the sound. A scraping, metal against wood. We turned. The gnome's lantern had fallen. But something shone inside. Not a bulb. A small folded paper. Eli picked it up, breath-catching. It's hers, he said, opening it slowly. She must have put it there before, his voice trailed off. I waited. Then he read it aloud. If you're reading this, then I'm braver than I thought. I came back to the house once. Left this behind. Thought maybe someone else would carry the light if I couldn't. I'm sorry I never let you be a kid. I'm sorry I was too broken to hold both of us. But you were always more whole than I ever let you believe. You don't have to forgive me. Just don't inherit my silence. Eli folded the note carefully, reverently, pressed it to his chest like it was the last heartbeat he needed. The storm began to break. Light filtered through the blinds in golden threads, touching everything in a hush. The gnome sat there, damaged, chipped, but still upright. Its lantern now empty, yet somehow fuller than it had ever been. I want to fix her garden, Eli said suddenly. I looked at him. What? He stood, eyes sharp now. She loved that garden, even when it was dying. Said it reminded her that some things bloom twice. I followed him out into the light rain, down the street to her porch. The plant had tipped over. Leaves scattered like a crime scene. The air smelled like memory. He knelt down and started clearing the debris with his sleeves. Not hurried. Not angry. Just steady. A rebirth. The quiet kind. I went home and brought tools. Soil. Scissors. Seeds. We worked in silence. The good kind this time. Neighbors stared. Some whispered. Some filmed. But none stepped in. And that was okay. This wasn't their story. That night, I left the broken gnome on Karen's porch. Lantern facing out. It looked like it belonged there. Not as a warning. Not as a memorial. As a witness. The next morning, something was different. My porch had a note. Not from Karen. Not from Eli. Sometimes it takes one broken thing to mend another. You reminded us. No signature. But a potted sunflower sat beside it. Small. Resilient. I walked out to the garden. Stared at the gnome. Then, from somewhere far off, I heard a familiar voice. Eli. Laughing. Real laughter. No filter. No bite. I turned. He was talking to a girl from the street over. The one always drawing on the sidewalk. They were comparing ink on their arms, tattoos, or maybe just sharpened dreams. I stayed back. He didn't need saving anymore. He needed space. It felt like the first true ending. But stories rarely obey us. A few days later, the HOA held a meeting. Open invite. Coffee. Donuts. Lies. I didn't plan to go. But I did. And I brought the gnome. Set it right on the table. Gasps. Curtis scowled. You can't bring symbols of protest into, it's not protest, I interrupted. It's a reminder. That before we find someone for flowers or paint colors or uneven grass, we should ask why they planted those things. What they were trying to bury. Or grow. Silence. Then someone from the back said, "She saved my dog once. Karen. She pulled him out of the ice. Never told anyone." Another voice. "She gave me my first book. Left it in the free library box." The room shifted. Curtis folded his arms, suddenly smaller. I didn't push. Didn't need to. Karen's absence spoke louder than any rulebook. That night, I sat on my porch, lantern lit beside me. Eli came by with a bag of seeds. He sat, wordless. Then asked, "Do you think she'll come back?" I didn't lie. "I don't know. But if she does, it'll be because the garden was still growing." He smiled. And then, softly, "Funny. First time I saw you, you were yelling about a sprinkler." I laughed. "First time I saw you, you were pretending not to cry behind a bush." He laughed, too. Time loop echo. But this time, softer. "Kinder." Before he left, he placed something in my hand. A piece of the gnome's chipped ceramic. The corner of its lantern. Sharp, jagged, useless on its own, but somehow complete. "I kept a piece," he said, "for when I need to remember." I still have it. In the drawer with the notes. Sometimes I take it out. Hold it. Feel the weight of all the things we survive without noticing. And sometimes, when the sky turns that soft storm gray, and the grass whispers secrets in the wind, I hear her voice. Not crying. Not apologizing. Just a hum. A garden song. The sound of someone learning to speak again. And in those moments, I remember the line she left behind. "Don't inherit my silence." She didn't just mean Eli. She meant all of us. And in that echo, I found my voice again. Not loud, but real. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the only thing that ever was. The days that followed felt like waking up slowly from a long dream. Not the kind you shake off with coffee and routine, but the kind that stays under your skin, faint and glowing, reminding you of something you almost forgot. The neighborhood softened. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in quiet ways. People began waving again. Even the ones who once kept their doors closed and their judgments louder than their greetings. One afternoon, I found a crocheted blanket draped over the free bench outside Karen's old porch. No note. Just there, warm and waiting. The garden grew, stubborn and graceful. Eli and I kept planting. Sometimes in silence, sometimes between long, lopsided conversations about movies, memories, and mothers. He started sketching again, first in the margins of receipts and napkins, then on actual canvases. The sidewalk girl brought him chalk and company. They began painting murals on the old HOA notice board. No one stopped them. Curtis didn't show up much after the meeting. Word was, he resigned. Moved in with his daughter across town. Said something about wanting to see his grandkids grow. I didn't feel triumphant. Just relieved. Like a room had finally been aired out after holding its breath too long. One evening, I walked out and found a small stone beside the gnome. It was hand-painted, shades of blue and gold. Tiny stars flicked across it like someone had bottled the sky. On the back, a single word, still. I didn't know who left it, but I knew what it meant. Still here. Still healing. Still trying. The gnome stood there quietly, lantern now filled with petals from the garden, dried, fading, beautiful in the way forgotten things often are. Its cracks caught the light just right at sunset, glowing faintly like veins of gold. Eli called it the witness. Said it didn't just see the worst of us, but the parts we try to hide even from ourselves, the fragile moments. The almosts. The choices we didn't know we were making at the time. I remember one morning, we sat side by side on my porch. The world was waking up soft, dew sparkling like forgotten stardust on the grass. He turned to me, eyes reflecting sky. "You ever wonder if she was trying to leave a trail?" I tilted my head. "For who?" "For herself," he said. "Like, every gnome, every note. Maybe it wasn't about us. Maybe it was so she'd know the way back. If she ever wanted to." That stayed with me. Still does. Because some days, I catch myself glancing down the road. No reason. Just habit. Hopeful reflex. As if one day, she'll return, not with fanfare or apology, but just return. Stand at the edge of her garden, touch the leaves, nod once, then disappear inside. Maybe she already has. In pieces. In petals. In the quiet courage of things growing where no one expected. Eli moved into the empty rental 2 houses down. Said it felt right to stay. Said he wanted to make art in the same place we made peace. His room is filled with canvases now. Some abstract. Some hauntingly exact. But always layered. Always deep. One canvas hangs on my wall. It's the gnome. But behind it, woven in smoke and light, are silhouettes. A woman kneeling in a garden. A child holding a flashlight. A porch, glowing. When I asked him what it meant, he just shrugged and said, "It's memory. You don't get to choose what stays." I think about that a lot. Especially on nights when the wind sounds like a lullaby you forgot the words to. When the stars blink like Morse code for the lost. The symbolic object, our little ceramic sentinel, stands weathered now. The paint faded. The crack deepened by time. But somehow it seems stronger. Like it's become something else entirely. Not just a symbol of what broke, but of what chose not to stay broken. One evening, long after summer had stretched thin and the air turned thoughtful, I caught Eli sitting with the gnome again. No phone. No sketchpad. Just sitting. "I dreamed about her last night," he said without turning. She wasn't young. Not like I remember. But she was smiling. Real smile. Not the one she wore to keep people from asking questions. What was she doing? He looked up at the sky, then back at the gnome. Watering sunflowers. Talking to them like they could hear. There was a pause. Then he said, "I think I'm done trying to find closure. Maybe closure is just a myth we tell ourselves to quiet the ache." I nodded. Because maybe he was right. Maybe some doors don't close. They stay ajar, letting light leak in, letting memory breathe. Still, weeks passed. Seasons shifted. Leaves browned and fell like forgotten letters from trees. The mural faded. The garden slept under frost. Life moved on in its quiet way. And then one day, a new family moved into Karen's house. A mother. 2 kids. A golden retriever who barked like joy. They didn't know the story. Not really. But they kept the garden. Didn't rip out the vines. Didn't move the gnome. The youngest daughter tied a pink ribbon around its lantern. For no reason. Or maybe for every reason. I stood across the street that evening, arms crossed, heart uncertain. And then I saw the mother kneel in the soil. Pull weeds. Pat the earth. Whisper something I couldn't hear. But I understood it. She looked up and saw me watching. Smiled. It wasn't Karen's smile. But it wasn't trying to be. It was hers. That was enough. I walked home slower that day. Took the long way. Watched the sky bleed color like a bruise healing backward. In the mailbox, a card. No name. Just a quote. Maybe forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook. Maybe it's setting yourself free from holding it. I placed it in the drawer with the ceramic shard and the notes. Someday, I'll forget where I put them. But not what they mean. That night, I stepped out into the cool dark. The air was quiet. No drama. No twist. Just stillness. I sat beside the gnome. Not for comfort. Not for grief. Just because. And for a long time, I didn't think. I didn't try to wrap it all up in meaning. I just listened. To the crickets. To the wind. To the whisper of soil remembering every hand that touched it. And when I finally rose, I whispered 2 words I hadn't said in years. Not to anyone. Not even myself. Thank you. For what? For staying. For leaving. For being broken and trying anyway. The story ends here. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it lives on in the garden, in the mural, in the chalk fading under rain. Maybe it lives in you now. And maybe that's the point. We're all just trying to grow something in the cracks. So if you've read this far, if you've felt even a small ache of familiarity, what would you leave behind for someone to find when they need to remember who they were? Tell me. Or better yet, tell yourself. And don't inherit the silence.